from Boston, according to a call to the area.
It was actually a beautiful fall day. There wasn't a cloud in the sky.
It was before 9 o'clock. I was standing with John Beckman in front of the campus eatery, and that American Airlines went over our head, and we both said, "This is too low."
I was in my office at 8 Washington Place, and one of my staff members came in, and he was visibly shaken and white. And I got him to sit down, and I asked him what had happened. He said he just saw a plane crash into the World Trade Center. So I walked outside, and I could see the plane at the tower burning.
In retrospect, it was a pretty big hole, but you think somebody from Teterboro kind of lost track of where they were.
I can remember, although not personally, these images of that little plane that ran into the Empire State Building a long time ago. So instantaneous in my mind, I imagined those big buildings with a little tail sticking out of it. So I thought, oh my God.
People were then at that point going up and down to get on the roof of Bobst. You couldn't see too much, except you could see the hole. But you still recorded it as a small plane accident. There was no way to get a sense of the scale from up on the roof of Bobst.
There was that horrific scene with that gaping. You know? And so then we stood there, sort of totally flummoxed by what was happening. And there were all these little, what looked like bugs flying around on them. They were the helicopters by then from the police or whoever. And then one of those little bugs gets larger and larger, and it's what turns out to be the plane that crashed in coming from the south, the second building.
And I remember saying to myself, not so much for me, but I said, this is going to change how my kids live.
And now the sirens of the smoke and the, yelling and screaming out on the streets and whatnot. And when the second happened, someone yelled terrorists, a word which is now a common word in our vocabulary, regrettably. And it became clear that something really unprecedentedly awful was happening.
We just sort of slipped into crisis management mode. The telephones weren't working, and so 4 or 5 people were designated to become runners. And go find out what's going on there, then come back and tell me, since I can't call them and ask them what's going on there.
The third piece of news was the Pentagon. And when that news came in from Washington, you could see everyone just clicked into a certain, we're under assault. I mean, it went from accident to what the hell is going on to this is a systemic attack.
The TV signal went dead. I remember having a staff meeting where I called everybody together and I said, look, NYU has been through 2 world wars. We're going to make it through this, but a lot of people are going to be looking to us today for leadership. So we've got to keep together. We got to look and see what we need to do on behalf of the university. We've got to think about the many people we're going to have to communicate with.
It was impossible to think strategically given so many variables, because by Thanksgiving there could be 5 more terrorist attacks. So we didn't know.
Within the hour, we had the command center up. We had always had a plan to mobilize a command center, which was at Weinstein.
The communications set up in Weinstein turned out to be crucial because we lost phones and even cell phones. The park became a gathering spot. You got a straight view from Washington Square Park downtown. So there was quite a gathering there when the buildings collapsed. And I can remember hearing something I had never heard, which is hundreds of people in a collective gasp.
This kind of terrible, mournful, sepulchral, almost spectral moan, that came up from the street and through the windows of the office. You don't hear much usually.
And so I felt more like, this really could be like the beginning of the end of the world.
After the buildings collapsed, the smell and the smoke started to drift uptown, and I think we're about 2 kilometers from the little over 1.5 miles from the World Trade Center, straight down, and so the smoke was pretty heavy. And as the smoke settled, and as more news of the Pentagon and the plane in Pennsylvania and so on, and the fact that all the planes were out of the air by sometime that afternoon, we had some sense, at least for then, that we just had to deal with what was there. What we saw and what we knew was what we had to deal with.
We had 200 Water Street. We had 25 Broad Street. We had 15 Cliff Street. We had Lafayette. We had over 2,000 students in that general area. We gave the order to evacuate all of the buildings. Students had already gone to class, but we sent residence hall staff around to tell people to evacuate and to come up to the square. And we set up a student shelter at Kohl's. We had wrestling mats put on the floor.
As quickly as we could, we did an assessment to try and find out whether or not we knew of any NYU faculty or staff or students who had been harmed. And as near as we could tell, the answer was none, which was important news to get out.
If you think of NYU as an extended family, there were members of the extended family who were in the Trade Center and were injured or died. A son of a faculty was killed.
Nearly all of us in New York had acquaintances, business, personal, or otherwise, who were potentially in that situation down there.
City Hall was putting that part of the town in lockdown almost.
We couldn't travel down to below 14th Street. So there was high alert. It was high alert.
We told students, come up to the square. We have a place for you in Kohl's, or bunk up with somebody. We told them to get up any way they could, mostly walk. Most of them were led by either RAs who were around or residence hall staff.
And kids came out in their flip-flops and shorts. It was a very hot day. No ID card, no nothing, no money. We gave every kid downtown $200 to either go home on or buy clothes with or to use as they wanted to.
I remember calling one hotel chain that we did a lot of business with and said, "You're never going to hear me say this again, but I want every single room that you can give me." We wanted students to be able to go back almost as business as usual.
We had phone banks for students to call their families, from emptying their clothes out of Water Street to counseling to letting international students talk on the phone as long as they wanted to their families, to students who took in other students in their homes and were so generous in that department.
Students were constantly being monitored or asked, how are you doing? Do you need anything?
I'm trying to find out if there were students who had family who was there, students who were in the buildings who may need some counseling because they were close enough to see horrific sights that one would never want to see.
Newspapers started calling in and radios because they knew that we had dormitories downtown. We were the major university closest to the epicenter of all this.
It's so odd, of course, no planes in the sky, but constant helicopter noise. And I think it's still, for me, unnerving when I hear too much helicopter noise, because to me it's very much associated with that. That's what you heard as a backdrop for several days.
I was in touch with the medical center where they were ready for large numbers of injured people who never really came. A significant number of our medical center folks went over to the west side to some of the piers that were used as respites for people to get first aid and so on, and they did some work there. But you know, there was a low level of injury relative to the calamity that occurred.
What did stay was that smell.
Yeah.
And you know, it was a smell like no other you had smelled. It obviously had an electric and plastic and material aspect to it, but it was so hard not to get to keep your mind away from what else it was.
Kohl's itself became a safe haven in the neighborhood.
Right.
For police, for first responders, for all sorts of people, used it as a way to shower or to clean up or to get some water, and it really was quite important, I think. I think the next major thing we started to think about was food. Mm-hmm. Because here we were actually expanding the university community because commuters couldn't go home and people were coming from other dorms and people wanted a place where they had friends and other people to go through this with. And of course, the city shut down all the bridges, all the tunnels. Transportation was very, very difficult. And we realized that in about 24 hours, we weren't going to have any food left.
And we were the size of a small town at this point. You're
so
talking tens of thousands of people.
We're talking about a lot of meals.
Clothing allowance, money. Bookstore was open so that they could replace their books. Free computers. We even started. We brought in bedding, brand new bedding, if students had to be bunking in with someone else.
Parents had reposed their trust in us to educate and take care of their kids, and so we had to do that, and we had to do it for our faculty too, to no small extent. I mean, it was NYU living its values at its best.
Each morning I got to the front steps of the law school at 7:30, and I just stood on the front steps and greeted each person as he or she came into the building and looked in their eyes and saw if they were okay and so forth. And I would stay there, I think, until 10 or 11 o'clock, you know, just so people knew that we were a community.
We actually started to think about the best thing for the community would be to get back to whatever normal was going to be, but to get back to the rhythms as quickly as possible. So we were ready to have classes on Friday.
But the city they'd closed all the public schools south of 14th, and they wanted a lockdown on it all. And we said, would you make an exception? We're not a K through 12. And there was pushback from the city on that because they were afraid to be giving out too many mixed messages. This is open, this is closed, But I think we did prevail on them by Friday.
More rapidly than I would have thought, NYU academically began to return to a sort of more customary pattern. Nothing was normal after that day, but much more. So classes began to happen, and the library, and the librarians were trying to figure out how to be open extra hours and long hours and all night. Guess where the biggest lines were? At the bookstore. This is the wonderful undergraduate NYU student community, and they're just driven. And for these young people whose parents wanted them to get out of there, they didn't want to leave. This was their place that they wanted to take care of. And as horrible and mixed up and spooky and scary and whatnot, they were not leaving their place.
From that moment on, we were not to talk about New York University anymore, but we were to talk about the New York University, and that we were going to affirm our connection with the city in a way that said we couldn't be a great university anyplace else.
There was much more awareness about religious differences, much more awareness of the issues that would motivate people to go to those kinds of extremes, and the issues of worldwide terrorism and the position of the Arab world and those kinds of differences across the globe were much more part of the vocabulary.
I think it helped further solder the close relationship between NYU and New York City. Our health people, from medical and dentistry to nursing and social workers, working with first responders. So this kind of total integration, the way NYU does, both things we needed to know from the city, but things we could give to the city.
and we broke ground on Furman Hall, the first building to break ground after 9/11 in New York. And that was deliberate.
It imbued what we were doing with a symbolism, and we were conscious of it.
I think I've probably never been prouder of NYU than how it reacted to 9/11. To me, it was the demonstration that it had a team of people that were really devoted to the institution and devoted to each other.
Now, right after 9/11, the city put all the skyscrapers dark. They closed down all the lights on Chrysler, Empire State Building. So night after night, you'd come home after these days, you know, and I'd pull up my shade and there would be the blackened Empire State Building. And it was just sort of a reminder that we were still in this state where, you know, it reminded me of our own little version of the London blackout where you weren't letting lights go on, and that feeling. I won't be able to recall exactly, but I think it was several weeks before that changed. And all of a sudden one night, it wasn't like they announced it, one night I go home, I lift up the shade, and there's the Empire State Building lit. And it was that immediate gratification, but actually to the point where I broke down crying. It was like that relief of, was the city ever going to seem normal again? And there it was.